A spark in the void, the air on Nexus 9 reeked of scorched steel and recycled oxygen, a sour tang that clung to the throat like a warning. Carved into the hollowed heart of a jagged asteroid, the mining station was a fortress of sweat and iron, its corridors pulsing with the growl of machinery and the sharp clatter of tools. Beneath the galactic Concord's fragile truce, humans and Zharans worked shoulder to shoulder, but their peace was a lie. 20 years after the Great Species War, the wounds festered. Human colonies razed by Zharan claws, Zharan jungles burned by human plasma. On Nexus 9, every glance was a blade, every word a spark. The station was a powder keg, and today it would ignite. Lyra prowled a maintenance corridor, her black fur sleek under the flicker of dying emergency lights. Her eyes, twin suns of molten gold, scanned the shadows, missing nothing. Each step was silent, her clawed feet barely brushing the grated floor, but her tail lashed with barely contained fury. The air carried a faint buzz of ozone, a sign of overworked reactors, but it was the hollow screen on the bulkhead that set her teeth on edge. It looped footage of a human soldier torching a Zharan grove, the flames licking sacred trees as the slogan flashed, "Beasts belong in cages." Her claws flexed, obsidian crescents glinting, capable of shredding steel or flesh. 20 years ago, Lyra had been a cub, watching her mother's body crumple under human fire, the jungle of Zara Prime reduced to ash. Now, at 25, she was a warrior, her oath to honor her mother's memory of fire in her chest. Nexus 9 was a punishment, a posting meant to test her loyalty to the Concord's truce. But every human she passed was a destroyer, their machines a mockery of her people's strength. She growled low, the sound vibrating in her throat, as a human worker shuffled past, his eyes darting away. Coward, she thought, her lips curling to bear a hint of fawn. Half a kilometer away, in the station's reactor core, Kai crouched before a console, his hands stained with grease, his patched jumpsuit a testament to years of scavenging parts. The screen flickered with warnings, pressure spikes, coolant leaks, but Kai's mind was elsewhere, snagged on memories of a Lyra colony. At 10, he'd hidden in a bunker, listening to his parents' screams as Zharan claws tore through their home. The monsters had left nothing but rubble and blood. Now, at 28, he was Nexus 9's best engineer, coaxing life from dying systems, proving humanity's ingenuity in a galaxy that sneered at their fragility. But the hollow screens didn't help, blaring footage of human victories over savage beasts. "Keep fanning the flames, Concord," he muttered, rerouting power with deft fingers. "Real peaceful." The console beeped, a red alert flashing. "Gefromnet landing closet." The readings were off, pressure surges in the auxiliary lines, too precise for a malfunction. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. Before he could trace the anomaly, a human worker stormed past, muttering, "Filthy beasts, ruining everything." Kai's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the screen. He'd learned to pick his fights, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. In the corridor, Lyra's ears twitched at the worker's words. Her tail froze, then quivered with rage. She spun, her voice a low growl. "Say that again, human." The worker, a wiry man with a scarred face, flinched but didn't back down. "You heard me, beast," he spat, his hand hovering near a wrench on his belt. "Your kind doesn't belong here." Lyra's claws snapped out, glinting in the dim light. "One more word, and your blood paints this wall." Her voice was thunder, her body coiled like a spring. The corridor went silent, workers freezing, human and Zharan alike. Another hollow screen flickered nearby, showing a Zharan warrior gutting a human colonist, the image stoking the fire in every gaze. Kai heard the commotion from the reactor core, his head snapping up. He stepped into the corridor, wiping oil from his hands, and saw the standoff. Lyra loomed over the worker, her presence a storm of fur and fury. Kai's pulse quickened. He'd seen what those claws could do in the war vids, but he'd also seen enough brawls spark riots. "Enough!" he barked, striding forward. "Back off, both of you." This station's got enough problems without your blood on the floor. Lyra's eyes flicked to him, narrowing. She recognized him, Kai, the human engineer, always tinkering, always mouthing off. Stay out of this, destroyer, she snarled, her tail lashing, knocking over a crate of bolts. The clatter echoed, sharp and final. Kai planted himself between her and the worker, his hazel eyes locked on hers. Call me what you want, Cat, but you start a fight here, we all lose. His voice was steady, but his hand gripped the wrench in his pocket, ready. He'd faced worse than an angry Zharan, but her presence, raw, primal, made his skin prickle. She was a predator, and he was prey who refused to run. The air crackled, every worker holding their breath. The hollow screen looped its propaganda. The screams of war a grim soundtrack. A distant drill whined, counting down to chaos. Nexus. 9 was a spark away from explosion, and Lyra and Kai were the flint. Then it came, a deafening roar that shook the station to its bones. The corridor buckled, metal screeching as a bulkhead collapsed in a shower of sparks and shrapnel. Lyra dove, claws scraping the floor, narrowly dodging a falling beam. Alarm screamed, red lights strobing, painting her fur in blood-like hues. Human sabotage, she roared, her mind flashing to the plasma cannons that had scarred her home. She sprang toward the blast site, warrior instincts drowning out fear. The air turned acrid, laced with a chemical sting, toxic gas, seeping from ruptured pipes. In the reactor core, the explosion threw Kai against the console, pain lancing through his ribs. Sparks rained, the console erupting in a blaze of shattered circuits. He scrambled to his feet, ears ringing, and saw the chaos. Pipes hissing, screens dead, a massive steel girder blocking the exit. Gas flooded the chamber, burning his lungs. Damn it, he coughed, snatching a toolkit from the floor. His eyes darted to the ventilation system, its fan stalled. He could rig a bypass, but time was slipping away. Then he heard it, a guttural snarl from beyond the debris. Lyra clawed through a shattered hatch, emerging into the reactor chamber. Her gaze locked on Kai, and her lips peeled back, baring fangs. You, she roared, recognizing the human from the corridor. This is your doing, destroyer. Her claws gleamed, her body taut with rage. To her, every human was a schemer, their machines tools of ruin. This explosion reeked of their cunning. Kai spun, heart hammering, and raised his wrench like a shield. Me? Look around, Cat. Your kind probably rigged this to wipe us out. His voice was sharp, years of grief fueling his defiance. The gas thickened, stinging his eyes, and he coughed, glancing at the stalled vent. Keep snarling, but we're both dead if we don't move. Lyra's tail lashed, her instincts screaming to gut him. Humans were weak, hiding behind their toys, but the gas was choking her, and the chamber's walls groaned, threatening collapse. She hissed, I'd rather die than trust a human. But her eyes flicked to the blocked exit, then back to Kai, who was already prying open a panel near the vent, his hands moving with desperate speed. Fine, die then, Kai snapped, stripping wires with trembling fingers. The gas burned his throat, but he forced his mind to focus, splicing a circuit to jump-start the fan. It sputtered weak but alive. Not enough. He needed time and leverage to clear the debris. You gonna stand there? Or do something, beast? Lyra's pride clashed with survival. Her mother's voice echoed. Honor is strength, but wisdom is survival. She growled. You're nothing without your machines, human. But she surged toward the collapsed girder, her powerful frame rippling as she sank her claws into the steel. Muscles strained, the metal groaning as she heaved. It shifted, but not enough. Move, destroyer, she roared, her voice raw with effort. Kai's jaw clenched. Stop calling me that. He spotted a coolant pipe overhead, its pressure valve intact. If he could redirect the gas, they'd have a chance. He climbed a shattered console, toolkit slung over his shoulder, and reached for the valve. Keep pushing, or we're ash. Lyra's growl was feral, but she doubled her efforts, claws screeching against steel. The girder budged, opening a narrow gap. Kai twisted the valve, shunting the gas toward an auxiliary exhaust. The vent fan roared to life, sucking out the fumes. He slid down, coughing, and shouted, "Now, Cat, go!" Lyra shoved one final time, and the girder gave way, revealing a path to the corridor. She lunged through, Kai scrambling behind. They collapsed in the hallway, gasping clean air, alarms still wailing. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by their ragged breaths. Lyra's eyes met Kai's, gold against hazel, hatred crackling like a live wire. But beneath it, a flicker of something else, respect, maybe a recognition. It vanished as quickly as it came. "You're still a destroyer," Lyra spat, rising, her claws retracting with a soft click. "And you're still a monster," Kai shot back, brushing dust from his jumpsuit. "But we're alive." Before they could trade more venom, Concord security drones swarmed the corridor, their scanners glowing red. A metallic voice boomed. "Lyra of Zara, Kai of the Human Coalition, you're under arrest for sabotage and attempted destruction of Nexus 9. Surrender or be neutralized." Lyra's fur bristled, claws snapping out. "Sabotage? This is a human lie." She glared at Kai, ready to pounce. Kai raised his hands, mind racing. "Hold on, Cat. I didn't do this, and neither did you." He faced the drones, voice steady despite the fear clawing his gut. "You've got no proof. Give us time to find it. Unless Concord wants another war." The drones hummed, processing. A hollow screen flickered, revealing a Concord officer, a serpentine figure with cold, slit eyes. "One cycle to prove your innocence," it hissed. "Fail, and you die. Together." Lyra snarled, "I work alone." "Not this time," Kai muttered, his eyes narrowing. "We're both screwed unless we figure this out." They stood, enemies bound by necessity, their hatred a tangible force. In the shadows, a figure watched, its voice a whisper on a secure channel. "They're perfect. Let them ignite the chaos, or end it." Lyra's claws twitched, itching to slash the smugness from Kai's face, but the drone's laser sights held her still. She memorized the corridor, scorch marks, twisted metal, knowing the truth hid in the wreckage. Her honor demanded she clear her name, not for Concord, but for Zara. "Fine, human," she growled. "But one wrong move, and your blood paints these walls." Kai smirked, though his pulse hammered. "Same to you, Cat. Let's not die before lunch." He scanned the debris, his engineer's mind already tracing the blast's origin. The explosion was no accident, too precise, too targeted. He'd need Lyra's strength to reach the core, but trusting her was like dancing with a plasma blade. As they moved toward the blast site, the station's hollow screens flickered, replaying their escape. Lyra's claws, Kai's wrench, their desperate teamwork. Workers whispered, human and Zharan, their glares heavy with suspicion. The air crackled with tension, a single spark from violence. Lyra and Kai, enemies to the core, stepped into the wreckage, unaware their next move would set the galaxy ablaze. The weight of the Concord's ultimatum hung like a blade over Lyra's neck. One cycle to prove their innocence, or death would claim them both. She crouched in the shadows of a maintenance bay, the air sharp with the tang of scorched wiring, her heart pounding a rhythm of rage and survival. Her golden eyes, narrowed to slits, tracked every flicker of light, every distant clank of security drones. Kai knelt nearby, his silhouette taut against the glow of a cracked datapad, his fingers moving with a precision that both irritated and intrigued her. He was human, a destroyer, yet he'd kept them alive in the gas-choked wreckage. Trusting him felt like betraying her blood, but dying would betray it more. "Move faster, human," Lyra hissed, her voice a low growl, barely audible over the hum of failing machinery. "Your kind schemes got us here. Don't waste my time." Her tail flicked, brushing a loose bolt that skittered across the floor with a faint clink. She froze, cursing her carelessness. Kai's head snapped up, his hazel eyes flashing with annoyance. "Schemes? My people didn't claw through a Lyra colony, leaving kids to bury their parents." His voice was sharp, but the tremor beneath it betrayed a wound that hadn't healed. Keep that tail still, or you'll bring every drone on us. He turned back to the datapad, its screen casting jagged shadows across his face. This blast wasn't random. Encrypted signal, off-station origin. Someone's playing us like pawns. Lyra's lips curled, bearing a hint of fawn. His words stung, dragging up memories of her mother's body, crumpled in a burning grove, human plasma scorching the air. Your kind burned Zara Prime to ash, she spat, her voice raw with 20 years of grief. Don't lecture me about loss, Tinkerer. Yet she leaned closer, drawn by the datapad's flickering code. What's it say? Kai angled the screen, his jaw tight. Detonator fragments. Zharan markings, but too perfect like they were carved to be found. And this signal? It's not human or Zharan. Concord tech, maybe, or something worse. His eyes met hers, a challenge in their depths. You're the hunter. Sniff out the truth. Her tail stilled, her pride warring with necessity. He was right. She could sense deception, the way a predator smells fear. Fine, she said, her voice cold but steady. But if this is a human trick, your blood's mine. She moved to a scorched bulkhead, her fingers tracing claw-like gouges in the metal. They were Zharan, but staged, lacking the raw savagery of her kin. Someone wants us blamed, she murmured, her mind racing. They want war. Kai nodded, his fingers flying over the datapad. Then we find the core logs. They're behind that. He pointed to a sealed terminal across the bay, its access panel locked with Concord codes. Can you open it? Or do I need to teach you how to use a crowbar? Lyra's eyes narrowed, but a flicker of amusement crossed her face, quickly buried. Watch and learn. Human. She crossed the bay in fluid strides, her muscles rippling under her sleek fur. The panel resisted, its bolts fused by the blast, but she sank her fingers into the seams, her strength tearing metal with a screech. Sparks flew, and the panel clattered to the floor, revealing a tangle of wires and a glowing terminal. Kai was at her side in seconds, plugging his datapad into the port. Not bad, he said, his tone grudging. Now let's see what secrets Concord's hiding. The terminal hummed, but before he could crack the encryption, a deep rumble shook the bay. A secondary reactor in the corner sputtered, its coolant lines glowing red, hissing with pressure. Hell, Kai muttered, sprinting toward it. If that blows, we're done. The floor was slick with coolant, and as Kai reached for the control valve, his boots skidded. He stumbled, arms flailing, and collided with Lyra, his hand brushing the base of her tail, a sacred boundary for Zharans, a violation that burned deeper than any insult. Lyra's roar was a thunderclap, her body spinning to slam him against a crate. Her eyes blazed, molten gold searing into him, her hand pinning his chest with crushing force. You defiled me, she roared, her voice shaking with rage and something deeper, shame, raw and jagged. Do you know what that touch means to my people? You've stained my honor. Kai's face burned, his pulse hammering under her grip. I didn't. Damn it, I slipped, he choked out, his voice cracking with panic. I wasn't trying to. Lyra, I swear it was a mistake. His eyes, wide with desperation, locked on hers, searching for a way to defuse the storm. He'd faced Zharan war vids, seen their claws rend steel, but this was different. Her fury was personal, a wound he'd unwittingly torn open. The air crackled, her breath hot against his face, until a faint were shattered the moment. A security drone hovered above, its red lens glowing like an accusing eye. It had captured everything: Kai's stumble, the forbidden touch, Lyra's roar, and was already streaming to Nexus 9's network. Lyra released him, springing back, her fur bristling with humiliation. You've destroyed me, she whispered, her voice breaking, not with anger, but with the weight of her people's judgment. To touch a Zharan's tailbase was to claim intimacy, a sacred bond. To her kin, she was now tainted, a traitor to their pride. Kai scrambled to his feet, his face still flushed. Destroyed you? That drone just made us the galaxy's biggest joke, he said, his voice sharp but laced with guilt. He glanced at the hollow screens flickering to life across the bay, broadcasting their collision. The footage was edited viciously, slowing on Kai's hand, amplifying Lyra's roar, twisting an accident into a scandal. Workers' shouts echoed from distant corridors, human and Zharan voices blending in outrage. In the human quarters, a miner's voice boomed over the comms, thick with disgust. Kai, you shamed us. Touching a beast like that? You know better than them. The words cut deep, echoing Kai's memories of Alara's fall, where trust in monsters cost lives. In the Zharan enclave, an elder's hiss crackled through a hollow call. Lyra, you betrayed our blood. A human's touch is a curse on our name. Vera, Lyra's sister, appeared on a private channel, her silver fur glinting, her voice venomous. Lyra, you've dishonored our mother's memory. I'll hunt you, sister, and cleanse this stain. Her dagger, etched with runes, gleamed as she spoke, a promise of retribution. Gorin, a human veteran with scars like a map of war, snarled over a public feed. Kai, you've spit on every human who died at their claws. I'll drag you to justice myself. His words hit Kai like a fist, stirring memories of his parents' screams, the guilt of surviving. He clenched his fist, his voice low. They think I'm a traitor, he said, glancing at Lyra. Your people think you're a disgrace. We're both screwed. Lyra's eyes, still burning, softened for a fleeting moment. I should kill you for this, she said, her voice raw, almost a whisper. But I can't. She turned away, her tail rigid, hiding the confusion in her chest. Why did his flustered apology make her hesitate? Why did his defiance mirror her own? Kai rubbed his neck, his smirk forced but genuine. Guess I'm too charming to kill. Huh, he said, trying to lighten the weight between them. Or maybe you're not as heartless as you pretend. Lyra's growl was half-hearted, her gaze flicking to the hollow screens. Your charm's a curse, human. But her voice lacked venom, and she hated herself for it. The screens kept blaring, the scandal fueling rage across Nexus 9. Kai's datapad pinged, pulling his focus. Hold on, he said, scanning the screen. Someone's amplifying this feed. Same encrypted signal as the blast. They want us hated, distracted. Lyra's ears twitched, her hunter's instincts kicking in. They're turning human against Zharan, she said, her voice steadying. Dividing us so the truth stays buried. Kai nodded, his fingers racing over the pad. Exactly. If we're the galaxy's villains, no one looks for the real saboteur. He glanced at the reactor, its hum now a high-pitched whine. First, we stop that from blowing, or we're ash. Lyra's pride battled her survival instincts, but she nodded. Fix it, Tinkerer. I'll keep the drones off us. She took position at the bay's entrance, her body a coiled spring, her senses locked on every sound. Kai worked fast, rerouting coolant through a backup line, his hands steady despite the chaos. The reactor's whine softened, and he exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. Done. We're not toast yet. He turned to Lyra, his grin sly. Nice guard duty. Didn't even scare the drones. Lyra's lips twitched, almost a smile. You're not useless, Kai. Don't let it go to your head. Their truce held, fragile but growing, until the datapad flashed a new message. Kharis holds the truth. Find the linking stone, or the galaxy burns. Lyra read it over his shoulder, her breath catching. Kharis, she said, her voice heavy with ghosts. My people bled there. It's a tomb of bones and steel. Kai pocketed the pad, his mind racing. Tomb or not, it's our only lead. Unless you want to stay and star in more holodramas. Lyra's growl was soft, her eyes scanning the shadows. We need a ship, before Vera finds me. Kai pointed to a battered shuttle in the corner, its hull scarred but intact. There's our ride. I can hotwire it in 10. 5, Lyra said, her tone sharp but laced with something new. Partnership, however reluctant. As they moved toward the shuttle, the hollow screens flared, Vera's voice a hiss. Lyra, you can't run from blood. Gorin's growl followed. Kai, I'll find you. The station's air thickened with hatred, every glare a spark. Lyra and Kai shared a look, defiance, not trust, but enough to keep going. They were outcasts, bound by a scandal that wasn't theirs, chasing a truth that could shatter the stars. In the shadows, a voice whispered. The spark spreads. Let burn. The shuttle's hull screamed, metal buckling as plasma bolts tore through the void. Lyra gripped the co-pilot's seat, her heart pounding a war drum. Her golden eyes locked on the viewport as Kharis' gray, scarred surface rushed closer. The cockpit was a furnace of sparking wires and flickering gauges, the air thick with the acrid bite of burning circuits. Vera's hunter ship, sleek and silver, darted behind them, its weapons glowing like the eyes of a predator. Goran's human skiff flanked their left, its plasma cannons charging with a menacing hum. The encrypted message, Kharis holds the truth. Find a linking stone was their only lead, but survival came first. Keep this rust bucket flying, Kai. Lyra snarled, her voice raw, her tail rigid against the seat. Her sister's betrayal burned deeper than the scandal's shame. Vera, who'd braided her fur under Zara's moons, now hunted her like prey. If we die, I'll haunt you first. Kai's knuckles whitened on the controls, his jaw set as he banked through Kharis' ash-choked atmosphere. Haunt me later, Lyra. He shot back, his voice sharp but strained, his hazel eyes flicking to the rear scanner. Your sister's got a better shot at killing us. Memories of a Lyra colony. Zharan claws, his parents' screams, clawed at his mind, but Lyra's fierce presence grounded him. He hated her kind, yet her strength was why they weren't already ash. Shields at 10%. We're not outrunning them. A bolt struck the shuttle's wing, sending it spiraling. Alarms wailed, and Lyra braced as the ground loomed. A canyon of black sand and jagged spires, relics of a war that had scarred both their peoples. Brace! Kai shouted, wrestling the controls. The shuttle crashed, skidding across the sand, kicking up clouds of ash that stung Lyra's nose. She kicked the hatch open, leaping into Kharis' biting wind, the air heavy with the metallic tang of old blood and rust. This was a graveyard, where Zharan warriors had fallen to human plasma, where human bunkers lay cracked like broken bones. Kai stumbled out, clutching his datapad, his breath clouding in the frigid air. 3 clicks to the cave system, he said, checking the coordinates. That's where the signal's coming from. Let's move. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease, taking in the shattered shrines etched with Zharan runes, the rusted human turrets half buried in sand. This place was a mirror of their hatred, and it chilled him. Lyra led, her movements fluid, navigating the canyon's rocky maze with a hunter's grace. Kharis reeks of death, she said, her voice low, her eyes tracing a toppled statue of a Zharan elder, its stone face charred by plasma. Your people did this, burned our sacred places. Her words were a blade, cutting through the wind. Kai's jaw tightened, his boots crunching on shrapnel. And yours gutted a Lyra, he said, his voice raw, memories of rubble and blood surging. But we're here now, Lyra. Blame won't find the stone. She glanced back, her eyes flickering, not with anger, but with something softer, a shared wound. Then keep up, Tinkerer, she said, her tone grudging but less venomous. A glint caught Lyra's eye, a tripwire Zharan made, its blades hidden in the sand. Vera, she hissed, leaping back as the trap snapped, blades missing her by inches. A hollow projector flared, Vera's silver form appearing, her voice a venomous hiss. Lyra, you've defiled our blood with that human filth. Her dagger gleamed, its venom-coated edge a promise of pain. Mother would weep for you. The word struck Lyra like a blow, her heart twisting. Vera, her teacher, her kin, now her executioner. Before Lyra could respond, a plasma cannon roared from above. Goran's skiff hovered, its hollow screen showing his scarred face, his voice a growl. Kai, you're a traitor to every human who bled here. The cannon fired, shattering a spire, debris raining down. Kai dove behind a boulder, pulling Lyra with him. He was my mentor, Kai muttered, his voice cracking. Save me on Lyra. Now he wants my head. Lyra's eyes met his, her voice low. Vera was my sister. Blood doesn't forgive. Kai spotted a wrecked Zharan war drone, its hull cracked but circuits sparking faintly. "I can use that," he said, scrambling toward it. "Keep them off me." Lyra nodded, her body coiling as she scanned the canyon. She spotted Vera leaping across a ridge, her movements a mirror of Lyra's own, predatory, relentless. "Go, Tinkerer," Lyra said, darting to intercept her sister, her strength tearing through another trap, its wires snapping like bones. Kai's hands moved fast, ripping wires from the drone's core, his mind racing. "EMP pulse," he muttered, splicing circuits with his scavenge tool. "Fry their sensors, give us a shot." His fingers shook, not from fear, but from Goran's words, the weight of betrayal. He'd built his life on proving human ingenuity, yet here he was a pariah. Lyra's shout snapped him back. She'd tackled Vera, pinning her briefly before a venomous dagger grazed her arm, drawing a hiss of pain. "Lyra!" Kai shouted, finishing the EMP. He activated it, a low hum pulsing through the canyon, scrambling Vera's hollow projector and Goran's skiff sensors. The skiff wobbled, retreating, and Vera vanished into the shadows, her voice echoing. "Run, sister, but blood will find you." Lyra clutched her arm, blood seeping through her fur, but she stood tall. "You didn't die," she said to Kai, her voice rough but laced with respect. "Not bad." They reached the cave system, its entrance a jagged maw glowing with crystal light. The air inside was thick, the walls carved with Zharan runes of unity and human graffiti cursing beasts. A figure emerged, a human woman, her lab coat tattered, her eyes sharp behind cracked glasses. "I'm Mira, exobiologist," she said, her voice steady. "I've studied Kharis. Data calls Zharan savages, but you—" She looked at Lyra, unafraid. "You're more than that." Lyra bristled, her pride stung, but Myra's curiosity disarmed her. A young Zharan, barely a teen, darted from the shadows, her patchy fur and wide eyes marking her as an outcast. "Lyra!" she cried, her voice trembling. "I'm Tala. My clan shunned me, but you're a warrior." Lyra's heart clenched, seeing herself in the cub's desperate hope. "Stay back, little one," she said, her voice soft. "This fight's not yours." Mira led them to an altar, its crystal pulsing with a faint signal. "The linking stone," she said, her voice hushed. "It's a relay broadcasting the sabotage signal. Nexus 9, the Scandal feed, all of it." Kai's datapad confirmed it, his eyes narrowing. "Someone's using it to spark a war," he said, his voice low. "And they let us here." Lyra touched the stone's fragment, its warmth stirring memories of Zharan legends. Unity, not destruction. A distant rumble shook the cave, unmarked ships descending, their lights like predator eyes. Vera's voice echoed from outside. "Your blood calls, Lyra!" Goran's skiff roared, cannons charging. Kai gripped the stone fragment, his voice firm. "We're not done yet." Lyra met his gaze, her fear raw. "I'm losing myself, Kai. My people, my honor." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You're not lost. You're the reason we're here." A whisper echoed through the cave. "They will break the stars or bind them." Vera's venomous dagger grazed Lyra's throat, its edge biting into her fur as her sister pinned her against the Kharis cave's rough-hewn wall, shadows twisting in the faint, flickering glow of dying Zharan runes, a stark backdrop to their shattered bond. "You've forsaken our blood for a human," Vera snarled, her silver fur bristling, her golden eyes glistening with tears, her voice a jagged wound that cut deeper than the blade she wielded, each word heavy with the agony of betrayal. Lyra gripped the linking stone fragment tightly in her fist, its warmth pulsing with a signal she didn't yet understand, a weight that anchored her against the lies branding her a traitor, the spark of a war poised to consume the galaxy. Her arm throbbed from Vera's earlier strike, blood seeping in her fur, but the pain of her sister's hatred was a far crueler wound, unraveling memories of their moonlit hunts under Zara Prime's twin moons, their laughter a distant echo now. "Our blood is Zara's, Vera," Lyra whispered, her voice fierce yet breaking, her golden eyes locked on her sister's, searching for the spark of the girl who'd been her heart. But peace is its soul. Mother taught us that, and I won't let lies tear us apart. The cave quaked, a plasma bolt from Goran's skiff tearing through the entrance, the blast splintering stone and filling the air with acrid dust that stung their lungs, a chaotic roar that threatened to bury them all. Goran's voice thundered through a hollow link, his scarred face twisted with righteous fury, his eyes burning with a hatred that sought to consume. "Kai, you're a traitor who let a Lyra burn," he bellowed, his words a lash meant to break, each accusation a reminder of the blood and ash that haunted Kai's dreams. "You side with that beast, shaming every human who bled on Kharis." Kai crouched beside Kala, the young Zharan cub, her patchy fur quivering as she clung to his side, her wide eyes brimming with a trust that pierced his guilt-ridden heart, a trust he felt unworthy of under Goran's gaze. Mira, the exobiologist, gripped her datapad tightly, her cracked glasses fogging with sweat, her voice cutting through the chaos with urgent clarity. "The stone's signal points to Concord Station. Someone's orchestrating this war. We have to get there." Kai's fingers tore into his toolkit, his hazel eyes haunted by Lyra's screams. The rubble that had buried his parents, his home, his childhood, all because he'd been too weak, too slow to act. Lyra was Zharan, his enemy by blood, but her unyielding fire was the anchor keeping him from crumbling under the weight of his guilt, the reason he dared to fight for redemption. He hacked into Goran's skiff signal, splicing a feedback loop to overload its targeting systems, his voice sharp with a desperation born of failure, a need to prove he wasn't the traitor Goran saw. "Lyra, keep her talking," he called, his hands moving with a precision honed by years of surviving on wit and will. But he didn't stop there. Kai patched into the hollow link, forcing his face on a Goran screen, his voice raw, cutting through the static. "I'm not your traitor, Goran. Lies burned a Lyra, lies you're swallowing whole. I'm saving what you've abandoned. Human, Zharan, all of us." Lyra's gaze held Vera's, her voice a plea heavy with the weight of their shared past, each word carved from the pain of a bond she refused to let die, her tone fierce yet woven with the poetry of Zara's winds. "The galaxy's tearing itself apart, sister, twisted by lies that feed pride and fear. Don't let them steal you from me, Vera. You're my strength, my blood, my home." Vera's dagger wavered, her sob breaking the silence, her golden eyes searching Lyra's for the sister who'd once braided her fur under starlight, who'd laughed with her in Zara's fields before the galaxy turned cruel. "You were my heart," Vera choked, her voice fracturing, tears streaming down her fur as doubt crept into the rage that had driven her blade, her grip faltering under the weight of Lyra's truth. Another bolt from Goran's skiff rocked the cave, the blast grazing Lyra's arm, searing her fur and drawing a sharp hiss of pain, but she stood firm, her eyes never leaving Vera's, her heart clinging to the hope that her sister could be saved. Kai's hack triggered, a piercing whine erupting from the skiff systems as its sensors overloaded, its cannons veering wildly to slam into a cliff face. The explosion sending a plume of ash and shattered stone skyward, a fleeting shield against pursuit. Goran's roar faltered, his hollow image glitching as Kai's words echoed. "I'm saving what you've abandoned." And the skiff wobbled, its systems crippled, its pilot forced to face the possibility that Kai was right, that lies had blinded him too. "You'll answer for this, Kai." Goran spat, but his voice lacked conviction, the seed of doubt planted as his skiff retreated, its cannons silent. "Move!" Kai shouted, grabbing Tala and Mira, sprinting toward a rune-lit exit where the cave's ancient markings pulsed faintly, a path to salvation carved by Zharan hands long gone. Lyra seized Vera's moment of hesitation, twisting free with a surge of strength, disarming her sister without striking back, the dagger clattering to the stone floor with a sound that echoed like a broken vow. "Join me, sister," Lyra urged, her voice trembling with hope, her hand outstretched, her golden eyes pleading for the bond they'd lost. "Be my strength again, as you were under Zara's moons." Vera staggered back, tears streaming, her whisper barely audible in the cave's groan, "I can't, not yet." She turned, vanishing into the shadows. Her absence a wound Lyra felt deeper than any blade, but her doubt a flicker of hope that their blood could mend. Lyra ran, her boots pounding the uneven stone, joining Kai at the shuttle parked on a windswept ledge beneath Kharis' ash-laden sky, its hull battered but resolute, a mirror of their own defiance against a galaxy that sought to break them. Kai dove for the controls, hot-wiring the engines with a spark and a prayer, their sputter a defiant cry against the chaos that threatened to swallow them whole. Lyra hauled Mira and Tala aboard, her strength tearing the hatch open against a gust of wind that carried Vera's faint, fading cry, a sound that lingered like a ghost in Lyra's heart. "I'll find you." The unmarked fleet loomed above, their precise formation a chilling signature of control, a trap woven to bury the truth they carried in the stone signal. Kai's datapad pinged, and he hacked the shuttle's transponder, broadcasting a Concord diplomatic signal that mimicked a damaged envoy craft, a desperate ruse born of his need to prove he wasn't the failure Goran claimed, a need to protect the people who'd become his purpose. The fleet hesitated, their sensors misreading the spec as an ally, and Kai seized the moment, roaring the shuttle skyward through a fleeting gap in their patrol, the engines screaming as they broke Kharis' atmosphere, the canyon's chaos dissolving into the void's cold, unyielding silence. In the cockpit, Lyra slumped into the co-pilot's seat, her breath ragged, the stone's warmth her only anchor against the ache of Vera's absence, the blood matting her arm a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. Her golden eyes flickered with a quiet respect as she looked at Kai, her voice low, T6, carrying the weight of their survival, a warrior's acknowledgement of a partner she'd never expected to need. "You faced Goran, Kai, not just his weapons, but his hate," she said, her words heavy with meaning, a nod to the courage it took to stand against judgment. "You fought for truth, not just survival, and that's a fire Zara's winds would honor." Kai's grin was pained, his gaze distant, fixed on the stars beyond the viewport, his hands still on the controls as Alara's ghost clawed at his heart, the weight of Goran's accusations a shadow he couldn't fully shake. "Goran sees a traitor because I see myself in Alara's rubble," he said, his voice rough, threaded with a self-deprecation that masked his pain, a confession he hadn't meant to voice. "I was too weak to save my parents, my home. Every plan, it's me trying to prove I'm not that kid anymore. But you, Lyra, you make me think I can save something, maybe even myself." Lyra's heart stirred, a forbidden spark igniting where hate had once ruled, her voice softening, weaving poetry through her pain, a warrior laying down her shield for the first time. "Zara's winds shaped my soul, Kai, bound it to its moons and its honor," she said, leaning closer, her golden eyes searching his, raw and unguarded, a truth she could no longer deny. "But you forged a new fire in me, one that burns for more than pride, for more than vengeance. You're not weak. You're the spark that keeps me fighting." Kai met her gaze, his usual wit faltering, his voice breaking with a vulnerability he'd buried for years, a truth he'd hidden even from himself. "I've been running from Alara's graves, Lyra, hiding behind tricks because facing what I lost hurts too much. But you make me want to stop running, to stand and fight for something real, even if it scares the hell out of me." Their words hung in the silence, a fragile bridge across the divide that had once defined them, a bond forged in the crucible of Kharis' chaos, a promise that they were more than their pasts. Mira interrupted, her voice steady despite her trembling hands, leaning forward from the back of the cockpit, her datapad glowing with the stone signal, her eyes flicking between Lyra and Kai with a scientist's curiosity and a friend's hope. "The signal ends at Concord's conference chamber, top level, surrounded by the galaxy's leaders," she said, her tone urgent, cutting through the weight of their moment. "Whoever's behind this, they're there." Tkala clung to Lyra's side, her whisper fierce with faith, her small frame quivering but resolute, her patchy fur catching the cockpit's dim light like a beacon of hope. "You'll stop them, Lyra," she said, her voice small but unwavering. "You're my hero." Lyra's chest tightened, the cub's hope a mirror to the light she'd nearly lost, a reminder of why she fought, why she dared to trust the human beside her. "Stay close, little one," she said, her voice soft but ironclad, her fingers tightening on the stone, its warmth a promise she'd keep, or die trying. The shuttle docked at Concord station, its spire a cold monument rising against the gas giant's restless swirls, a facade of unity masking a galaxy teetering on the brink of collapse, its grandeur suffocating under the weight of distrust. Kai spoofed the maintenance bay's sensors, slipping the shuttle into a shadowed port where drones patrolled, their red lenses blind to the ghosted signal, the air heavy with the sterile scent of metal and ozone, an oppressive weight that pressed against their resolve like a warning. "We're invisible until we hit the conference chamber," Kai said, his voice low, his toolkit slung over his shoulder, his hazel eyes sharp with the focus of a man who decided to stop running, a man who'd faced Gorin and lived, who'd chosen to fight for more than redemption. He led them through a service tunnel, the hum of machinery pulsing like a tense heartbeat, the walls tight with coiled pipes that seemed to constrict with every step, a labyrinth that mirrored the tangle of his own doubts, now loosening under the fire of Lyra's trust. The tunnel snaked upward, a claustrophobic maze of flickering panels and hissing vents, until they reached a grate overlooking the conference chamber. The room was a gilded prison, its vaulted ceiling a cascade of false stars that shimmered with a mocking promise of peace, their light cold and unattainable, casting long shadows over the chaos below. Diplomats packed the floor, humans in stark, silver-trimmed uniforms, their faces taut with suspicion, their hands hovering near concealed weapons. Zharans in armor etched with ancestral runes, their tails rigid with pride, their golden eyes glinting with barely restrained hostility. The air was thick with the weight of a truce on the verge of collapse. Each whispered insult a spark waiting to ignite a fire that would consume them all, a fire stoked by unseen hands. Lyra dropped through the grate, landing with the silent grace of a predator, her fur rippling under the starlight. Kai at her side, Mira and Tala trailing close, their breath shallow in the tense, suffocating air. The stone pulsed in her grip, its warmth a call to truth, a beacon against the lies that had torn her world apart, a weapon to wield against the force orchestrating their pain. Their presence drew gasps, then snarls, human delegates muttering outcast, Zharan's hissing shame, but Lyra stood tall, her voice ringing out, fierce and unyielding, a warrior's truth cutting through the chamber's din like a blade forged in starlight. "Your enemy isn't us," she declared, her golden eyes sweeping the room, daring them to listen, her fur bristling with defiance, her presence a storm that demanded attention. "Someone's woven lies to spark a war, pitting human against Zharan to blind you to their betrayal." Her words hung in the air, a challenge that silenced the murmurs, the weight of her presence. A Zharan warrior unbroken by exile, unbowed by hate, holding the room captive, forcing them to confront the possibility of truth. Kai moved to a console near the dais, his datapad plugged in, fingers flying to hack the chamber's broadcast system, his mind sharp despite the ghosts of Lyra threatening to pull him under, the weight of Gorin's accusations a shadow he'd faced and defied. Lyra's fire kept him grounded, her strength a reminder of what he fought for, a purpose beyond the guilt that had defined him for too long. "I'm pulling data," he muttered, rerouting security protocols, his hazel eyes flicking to Lyra, a silent vow to find the truth, to prove he was more than the kid who'd failed Lyra, more than the traitor Gorin had named. Before Lyra could press her case, a low hum pierced the chamber, a sound that crawled under the skin, and the air shimmered with a deadly haze. Nanites, their metallic glint a swarm of microscopic teeth, tearing through flesh and steel with merciless precision, a weapon as cold and calculated as the ambition driving it. Screams erupted as diplomats collapsed, their bodies dissolving into gray ash, uniforms and armor crumbling like sand in a storm, their cries a cacophony of human and Zharan agony that echoed through the gilded hall. a sound that threatened to drown out hope itself. A cold voice boomed from the hollow system, smooth and venomous, chilling the blood of all who heard it, a voice that seemed to coil around the heart like a serpent. "You've disrupted my order. Now you pay." Xar, a serpentine Concord official, rose from the central dais, his scales glinting under the false stars, his slit eyes burning with a malice that seemed to swallow the light itself, his presence a poison that infected the room, a predator who'd played the galaxy for fools. Lyra's heart pounded, the stone burning in her hand as she tore it from her satchel, holding it high, its runes catching the starlight like a beacon of defiance, a symbol of the unity someone sought to destroy, a weapon to turn lies to ash. "You slaughter for power," she roared, her voice trembling with rage and grief, her fur bristling as she stepped toward Xar, her presence a storm against his venom, a warrior who'd traded honor for hope, who'd found strength in the human she'd once called enemy. "You've twisted our pain, human Zharan, to tear us apart." The nanites surged, grazing her arm, a sting like fire that she ignored, her strength a wall against the chaos, her golden eyes blazing with a fire that refused to be extinguished, a fire kindled by the human who fought beside her, by the sister she still hoped to save. Kai's voice cut through, raw with urgency, his fingers dancing over the console as nanites seared his skin, leaving trails of blood and pain that he pushed through, his mind flashing to Lyra. The rubble, the screams, the moment he'd frozen, the moment he'd become the failure Goran saw. He wouldn't freeze now, wouldn't let Goran's accusations define him. "Keep him talking, Lyra. I'm digging for proof," he shouted, rerouting power with a defiance born of his need to atone, to prove he could save something, someone this time. His broadcast surged, a signal that would carry whatever truth he found to every corner of the galaxy, a desperate bid to stop this war before it consumed them all, a bid to rewrite the failure that had defined him. "There's something in the stone's data, orders, signals, something big." Kai's voice boomed, echoing through the chamber, a challenge to the lies that had fueled Goran's hate, a truth that honored Lyra's memory by fighting for a future she'd never see. Xar's laugh was a hiss, his tail coiling like a whip, his claws tapping a hidden device that pulsed with malevolent energy, feeding the nanites' hunger with a precision that spoke of years of planning. A serpent who'd woven a web to trap them all. "You're insects, clinging to a dying dream," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom, his slit eyes glinting with the certainty of victory, a predator toying with prey he believed already broken. "Unity is a lie. Hate is eternal." The nanites swarmed, a glittering fog that turned the air to a haze of death, diplomats clawing at their throats, human and Zharan screams blending into a single, desperate wail that echoed through the chamber, a sound that threatened to drown out hope itself, a sound that tested the fire Lyra and Kai had kindled together. Mira pulled Kala behind a marble pillar, her voice shaking but resolute, her glasses reflecting the chaos like a fractured lens, her scientist's mind clinging to logic amidst the horror. "Lyra, the stone, it's our only shot," she called, her words a lifeline in the storm. Kala's eyes were wide, her plea desperate yet unwavering, her small voice cutting through the din like a beacon of hope. "You can do it, Lyra. You're our warrior." Lyra advanced on Xar, the stone raised, her body a shield against the nanite haze, her voice steady now, a fire kindled in her soul that no war could snuff out, a fire that burned for more than Zara, for more than herself, for the cub who saw her as a hero, for the sister she refused to lose, for the human who'd become her strength. "You're wrong," she said, her words sharp and unyielding, cutting through the chaos like a blade forged in starlight, her golden eyes blazing with a truth she'd fought to claim. "Hate blinded me, kept me from seeing the strength in those I called enemy, the strength that's carried me here." Her eyes found Kai, raw and unguarded, a truth she could no longer deny, a spark that burned brighter than any divide, a bond that had grown in the crucible of their shared fight. "He's not my shame," she said, her voice trembling with a fierce, poetic intensity. He's the fire in my soul. The reason I fight for more than vengeance. For a galaxy where blood doesn't divide us. Kai's hands froze on the console, his breath catching, his voice breaking as he met her gaze across the chamber. The nanite's sting forgotten in the weight of her words, a weight that lifted the shadow of Lyra's guilt, if only for a moment. Lyra, I buried my heart with Lyra. Told myself I didn't deserve to feel again, he said, his voice raw, stripped of the wit that had been his shield, a confession that laid him bare. But you've pulled it back, piece by piece. Show me I can fight for something beyond my failures. I'll save this galaxy for you, or I'll die trying. Their confession hung in the air, a fragile spark in the chaos. A bond forged in fire that was stronger than hate, brighter than the war Ksar craved, a bridge across the human-Zharan divide that Goran and Vera had once embodied. The chamber doors burst open with a deafening crash, and Vera stormed in, her silver fur glinting under the false stars, her venomous dagger raised high, her face streaked with tears that caught the light like shattered glass, her presence a storm of grief and rage. Lyra, you've forsaken our mother's blood, she screamed, her voice a jagged wound, the nanites parting around her, Ksar's control sparing his pawns, a cruel reminder of the leash he'd placed on her heart. Her charge was a blur of predatory grace, but her golden eyes were tormented, torn between duty and the sister she still loved, the sister she'd nearly killed in the cave. Lyra faced Vera, the stone pulsing in her hand, her voice raw but resolute, a plea wrapped in defiance that carried the weight of their shared past, a warrior who'd traded pride for hope. I've forsaken hate, sister, not you, she said, stepping closer, unarmed, her golden eyes locked on Vera's, searching for the spark of the girl who'd taught her to hunt under Zara's moons, who'd been her heart before the galaxy turned cruel. Mother wanted peace. Vera, she wanted us to be more than tools of war. Join me. Please be my strength again. Vera's sob choked the air, her dagger trembling in her grip, her body shaking as Lyra's words crashed against the wall of her rage, cracking it with the promise of something better, a promise that echoed the doubt Kai had planted in Goran's heart. I wanted to save you, Vera whispered, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her fur as her dagger slipped, clattering to the polished floor, her body slumping as hope flickered where despair had reigned, a flicker that mirrored the shift Kai had forced in Goran's heart. Kai's broadcast went live, his voice booming across the chamber, a clarion call that cut through the nanite's hum, a truth that honored Lyra's memory and defied Goran's accusations. We're finding the truth in this stone, he declared, his words sharp, unwavering, a challenge to the lies that had fueled division, a vow to the human he'd been and the one he'd become. It's got answers, orders, signals, proof of who's behind this. The chamber's hollow system shifted, ready to display whatever Kai could pull from the stone, a canvas for truth waiting to be painted, a tool to reach Goran, wherever he was, and force him to face the reality Kai had fought for. The diplomats, those still standing, stared, their murmurs shifting from anger to curiosity, human and Zharan faces lit by the dawning possibility of truth, a possibility that echoed the doubt Kai had sown in Goran's heart. Lyra reached the chamber's central hollow emitter, a towering spire of crystal and steel that pulsed with the station's communication grid, its surface cool against the burning heat of her hand, a stark contrast to the fire in her soul. She slammed the linking stone into its core, her Zharan blood unlocking its ancient power, a surge of light erupting that seemed to sear through her very being. Activating it meant sacrificing her honor, her ties to her people, everything that had defined her as a warrior, a sister, a daughter. For peace, she whispered, tears falling, her voice a prayer to her mother's memory, a vow to Talia's hope, to Vera's redemption, to the galaxy she'd chosen to save, a sacrifice that echoed Kai's own. The stone's light blazed, runes flaring as its data flooded the hollow system, a cascade of unforgeable truth, Ksar's voice, cold and commanding, ordering a fake Zharan attack 20 years ago to spark the human-Zharan war, his orders to sabotage Nexus 9 to fan the flames, his plan to frame Lyra as a Zharan traitor and Kai as a human sellout to reignite the conflict through the nanite attack on Concord. The hollow screens lit up with his serpentine face, his words damning. Lyra and Kai will be my pawns. Their blood will burn the galaxy anew. Diplomats gasped, human and Zharan faces frozen in shock as the stone revealed Kharis' 20-year manipulation, his orders to his fleet to attack Kharis and Concord, his nanite codes to slaughter the chamber, all to seize power. The stone, a Zharan relic, had stored every command, every lie, a mwachua of truth that no one could deny, its signal now broadcasting galaxy-wide through Kai's hack, a beacon exposing Kharis' evil to every star. Kai staggered to Lyra's side, the nanites scorching his arm, leaving trails of blood and pain that he ignored, his hand finding her shoulder, steady and unyielding, a touch that spoke louder than words, a touch that carried the weight of Lyra's memory and the hope Lyra had kindled. His own sacrifice, Lyra's memory, his pride as a human who'd survived when others hadn't, cut like a blade. But he stood with her, his hazel eyes fierce with a fire that matched her own, a fire that had grown in the crucible of their shared fight, a fire that had defied Gorin's hate and Vera's rage. "We're no pawns, Xar," he roared, his voice a vow forged in the chaos, a promise that transcended the divide that had once defined them, a promise that he'd fought for by facing Gorin, by broadcasting the truth, by standing with Lyra. "I'll save this galaxy. Not for me, but for her, for them, for all of us." His words were HFY incarnate. Not just hacking a console, but rising above his past, seizing control from a manipulator, and giving the galaxy a chance to heal. The stone's nanite codes surged through the hollow emitter, Lyra's blood unlocking their power, Kai's hack redirecting them to turn Kharis' weapon against him. Nanites swarmed Xar, his scales cracking, blood rissing, his scream a high-pitched wail of agony that echoed through the chamber. "No, I am your master," he shrieked, his veil rung like shattered glass, his body convulsing as the nanites tore into him, a fitting end for the serpent who'd sown death. The haze dissolved, the nanites shattering into dust, the chamber spared by the truth Lyra and Kai had unleashed, a truth that broke Kharis' stage. Xar collapsed, scales dull, gasping as diplomats, human and Zharan, turned, his allies fleeing, shouting Randoc and traitor of Eons. A Zharan general spat. "You've betrayed us all," as guards dragged Xar, clawing and begging, his pleas drowned by jeers, his legacy ash in a tam defeat that burned in every star, a punishment that satisfied the galaxy's cry for justice. The chamber fell still, the diplomats staring at Lyra and Kai, their hatred replaced by awe, their faces lit by the fading glow of the stone's truth, a light that bridged the chasm between them, a light that carried the evidence Kai had broadcast, the evidence that would reach Gorin and force him to reckon with his own blindness. Vera knelt where she stood, her dagger forgotten, her voice a broken whisper as she reached out a trembling hand, her silver fur catching the starlight like a beacon of hope. "Lyra, I was his pawn," she said, her golden eyes wet with tears, her heart turning from rage to redemption, a mirror to the doubt Kai had planted in Gorin. Lyra crossed the distance, pulling her sister into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her fur as their bond, fragile but unbroken, began to mend. "We're still blood, Vera," Lyra said, her voice soft, a wound starting to heal, a promise that they could rebuild what had been torn apart. Kala broke from Myra's side, her small arms wrapping around Lyra's waist, her sob a mix of relief and joy, her patchy fur quivering with the weight of what they'd survived, her faith a beacon that had guided them through the dark. "You did it, Lyra," she whispered, her voice muffled against Lyra's side, her hope a light that had never wavered. Mira stepped forward, her glasses askew, a rare smile breaking through her reserve, her voice quiet but firm, her scientist's mind marveling at the data of their victory. "You've changed the equation," she said, her eyes flicking between Lyra and Kai, human and Zharan, traitor and outcast. Now something more. Goran entered, his scarred face heavy with regret, his voice low as he met Kai's gaze. I was blind, Kai. Called you traitor when you were saving us. Forgive me. Kai nodded, Alera's weight lighter, his voice steady. We were all blind, Goran. Let's not be again. They stepped to the chamber's viewport, Vera and Tala at their side, Mira trailing close. The gas giant swirls a quiet witness to their victory. The galaxy stretched before them, its stars flickering with a promise of something new, something worth fighting for. Lyra's hand tightened on the stone, its warmth a vow she'd carry forward. We've lit a flame, Kai, she said, her voice steady. T6, a warrior's prayer to a galaxy reborn. One that hate can't snuff out. Kai's grin softened, his hand brushing hers, his voice a quiet vow. Then let's keep it burning, Hunter. The stone pulsed faintly, a strange signal flickering through its runes, then fading into the void silence, a whisper of something distant, something yet to come. The stars held their gaze, and for now, that was enough.